Here's a quick walkthrough of how you can go from an OpenAPI spec to deploying to your Kong Gateway Manager. You can go through a couple steps here first. I'm going to convert my OpenAPI spec to Kong configuration. Then I'm going to add some plugins that I have stored, and then add tagging to make it easier to really segment and isolate which changes I'm going to be making. I'm going to do a diff just to make sure I know what my current Kong config is, what changes are going to be made so I can verify those. And then before I apply it, I'm going to back up the current configuration that I have in my gateway and apply the changes. If I wanted to reset this to be able to run it again, I'll use the decK command for gateway reset. Walk through the file system that I have here. In my folder structure, I've got a folder with plugins, a folder with specs, as well as this markdown for the instructions, and then a pre-packaged decK configuration. So you can set some of the flags that you would put in your decK command in one of these pre-defined config files. So I've got that here and masked out my control plane token. But you can see I'm working against the control plane that's labeled non-production. And I'm going to apply this OpenAPI spec for a Kong Air flight service. When I go through the process, I'm going to apply two plugins, the rate limiting plugin, as you see here, and the key auth plugin. So what should happen is I go from OpenAPI spec, and if I'm applying it to my non-production control plane, you see that there's no flight service available. What I'd like to have when I'm done with this process is a flight service in my non-production control plane with the key auth and rate limiting plugins applied. So let's walk through these steps. First thing I'm going to do is take the OpenAPI spec and convert it to Kong configuration. You'll see this Kong YAML was created. This is a decK configuration based on the spec. It's automatically applied in all Kong objects. And then next thing I'm going to do is add these plugins. And again, I'm going into this folder labeled plugins, which contains my key auth and my rate limiting plugin. If I go back to my Kong YAML, you can see that these plugins are here now. And I also want to do tagging. So let's do tagging next. It's a good idea to do tagging after you've made modifications and added plugins, because then it'll apply the tags to those new plugins as well. You might not get those tags applied if you do the tagging before the plugins. So you can see here the tags are applied to the plugins, and they're also applied to the routes and the services. Okay, so I've got my plugins applied, I've got my tags applied, and now I'm going to do a diff to see what changes would be made if I were to run this. Okay, you can see created a service, created 4 routes, and added those plugins to the service at the service level. That looks good to me. I'm going to do, just for safety, in case I wanted to have to roll back to a previous version if something was wrong, I'm going to do a dump of the current config, which is going to take the current config that's in the non-production control plane, and it's going to make a backup file with a date stamp on it. So you can see that shows up. I don't have anything in there because I'm using the tagging for flights example. There's nothing tagged with this tag currently in my control plane, so nothing should come back here. If I had things tagged with that or excluded the tagging, it would give me a dump of the entire configuration. But again, I want to target the specific changes that I want to make. Okay, so I've done all that. I have done a dump, and that's actually the wrong one, but I'll update that. So next thing I want to do is actually apply these changes. So I'm going to, again, go to my gateway and sync, which is going to push these local changes from my kong.yaml file. I'm going to use my decK preloaded config, and I'm going to apply the tag flights example. Okay, so you can see it looks very similar to the diff, but this is actually doing the apply. And I go back to my non-production environment, and if I refresh this page, you'll see that the flight service now exists. It's been tagged with flights example. I've got the 4 routes that were automatically generated from the OpenAPI spec. And if I look at the plugins, there's a key authentication plugin and a rate limiting plugin applied. So that's a quick overview of how you could use decK from the command line in your CI/CD pipelines to apply to a specific control plane. Now, if I was going to promote from the non-production environment in that control plane to the production control plane, I would simply do the same thing, but instead of having the predefined control plane of non-production, I could either update this file or I could specify it in a flag for my decK commands. And again, when you're promoting from a non-production environment to a production environment, the tagging gets even more important because you want to probably cherry pick some changes from that environment, not get everything that's in those environments or everything that's in your repository.